So, Javier, so far we talked about um, the questionnaire, the initial questionnaire, and thinking about the questionnaire as a filter to choose, for example, 15, 20 teachers. We might decide on 2 or 3 teachers using the results from the questionnaire. We talked about thinking based on the results of the questionnaire whether you want to focus on teacher correction to a whole group or correcting students in front of a whole group, or whether it's small groups. Okay, and we talked about basing that decision on the results of the questionnaire. Right? Okay. So we have 3 weeks. We're starting week 6. We have 3 weeks now to design our instruments. We're talking about a questionnaire that I think we ought to pilot. That is, send it out to some group of teachers that aren't going to be your participants, but that will give you some results as to the quality, the reliability, the of the instruments, or the quality of the instruments. So, can you tell me what school you're thinking about, or what type of teachers you're thinking about including in your research?
I was thinking about here, university.
Okay, and which groups, which classes?
Like extension
Okay.
Courses, English courses.
All right. So if you want to focus on extension teachers, I would find a group of maybe 5 or 6, 5 to 10 teachers in lenguas extranjeras that do not give classes in extension, and see whether they can complete your questionnaire just to see what kind of results you get. Okay, they're not going to participate in your research, but it's a pilot for you to see if there are any changes that you need to make to your questionnaire.
Okay, and so if maybe I change like to teachers here in the major, will it be like more difficult, like to find like pilot and to find like?
Well, the pilot, yeah, okay, the pilot could be teachers from the BA too.
Well, instead of I was thinking about doing the research also here, in the major.
Okay.
Maybe there are a few teachers for that.
Well, I don't know. You're asking, if I understand your question correctly, if you think, because you're looking at the way teachers are correcting grammar, right?
Yes.
Let's look at your research questions.
Yes. That would maybe for propedeutico. Those semesters are like making more corrections than the ones that are without.
All right. So you're looking at how do they correct speaking errors. Well, I don't know. Maybe one of the practicum classes. If their teachers are doing their practicum, maybe, I don't know, does the tutor correct the way in which they're speaking? I mean, that's another option. Okay. Do they, how do they correct, if they're making grammatical errors when they're giving classes, does that come up? I mean, that's another possibility. In prope, in speaking, perhaps speaking and listening. I'm not sure if they divide up that class anymore, but speaking class in prope might be another possibility. Maybe HCI, HCA, maybe because I think there's a speaking part there. It's up to you. I mean, the idea is really to try to find situations where it's likely to happen. And I immediately thought about lenguas extranjeras because if you wanted to focus on extension courses, this would be very similar to what they would probably answer. So, if you send out a questionnaire in your pilot, trying to think as many teachers as possible, but teachers who aren't, or teachers that you won't choose for your study, they would basically be the same type. They would be in the same type of situation and maybe give you better answers, so that you could then say, okay, most of my teachers, I don't know, the worst case scenario, they don't correct that much, or maybe they don't correct the way that you're thinking about, or but yeah, I don't see any problem with focusing on extension courses.
Okay.
Unless you just really want to focus on a particular class in the BA. I mean, this is a decision you need to make as a researcher, and I think you can go either way as long as you find a class, a situation that gives you the information that you need, right? And so, you've taken all these classes from the BA. Think about classes where, there's certain classes that are more likely that teachers are correcting the way they speak. And I think, in a practicum class, that probably, comes up. I mean, you could focus just on a practicum class where the teacher's actually giving a class or a mock class even, and where there's a feedback from a tutor, and what are they correcting? Are they correcting the way they speak? But again, at the same time, you're not going to have the teacher give feedback probably at that moment. If you look at a regular English class, there's more possibilities. They may correct right there at the moment, or they may wait at the end. Right? There's more options typically, I think, because usually when you're focused on that, if you're a tutor for a practicum class, you're not going to say anything usually until the very end. So, yeah, I don't see a problem with focusing on extension courses. I think you'd be better off.
Okay.
I think focusing on that, and then thinking in terms of teachers from the lenguas extranjeras to do your pilots.
Okay.
Okay. So we need to be thinking about what you need to include. One of the questions I get is, well, how long should the questionnaire be? And instead of thinking really in terms of how many questions or how long or how many pages, think how long would it take for them to complete it. And I would try to shoot for 10 to 15 minutes, to complete the questionnaire more or less, because you don't want to take a lot of time, for them to fill it out. But you also don't want to have them fill it out in like 2 minutes when you could have gotten maybe more information. Okay. So it's going to depend on the type of questions. If you have just closed questions, multiple choice or true and false, you only have like 10, well, they're probably going to complete it in 2 or 3 minutes. But if you also include open questions or some questions that require a little bit of thought and reflection, then obviously that'll take a little bit more time. So think of the mixing it between open and closed questions, and try to think about how long it's going to take. And when you pilot your questionnaire, try to time it,
okay,
right, and see how long it takes. Maybe you think it's going to last 15, but it turns out that it lasts 30 minutes. So then you may need to make some changes. Think about the types of answers you get from the questions. Are they answering the way that you wanted them to answer, that was your intention? If they answer something completely different, then look again at your questions and say, well, maybe I need to adapt it. Maybe I'm not saying it the right way. Okay, and obviously those are things too that I can check beforehand. But even after I check it, you never really know how they're going to answer it until you pilot, right? So the way I would like to do this is you design something, we check it, then you pilot it.
Okay.
And we have 3 weeks to design our instruments, and we have, I think, 3 or 4 weeks to collect the data. If you finish and you pilot your instruments and you're ready to go in 2 weeks, or even 1 week, you can start your data collection as soon as you finish your instruments.
Okay.
So even though we have 3 weeks, it's really, I'm going to go at your pace. If you want to meet before our next tutoring session, you want me to look at something before you pilot, for example, this Saturday, that's fine. Bring it in. I'll look at it, and you can work at your own pace. All right. So this going forward now, it's pretty much I'll go at your own pace as far as how you want to collect your data and start continuing on with your research.
Okay.
So let's do that. Let's focus on the questionnaire, thinking of it kind of as a type of filter and choosing, because one of the things you're going to want to be prepared to answer when you give your presentation to the Sinodales, from the examiners, is you need to provide a justification as to why you chose those 2 or 3 teachers. It's not just like, oh, son mis cuates, o fue más fácil porque yo trabajo en esta escuela. No es eso. Tiene que tener así una razón a rationale for choosing those teachers, and the rationale comes from the answers to your questionnaire. You're going to say they answered this way. That's why I chose this, because it's pertaining to my research questions. Okay. Now we also need to be thinking about other types of information that we want to use and collect, because we want to try to triangulate our data. So one type of data that we're going to have is obviously the questionnaires, but we also need to be thinking about other types of data.
In the questionnaire? So what?
Not in the questionnaire, but besides the questionnaire. So the questionnaire is one type. Another type is an observation, so we'll need to be thinking about some sort of observation sheet. And
recordings?
Yeah, I'm gonna classify recordings as observations.
Okay.
So your observations are going to be your written observations and for sure recordings. So you do need to record or videotape, preferably video if you can, but minimum you need to have a good audio where you can hear the actual exchanges, the discussions. Okay, so that's why it's important for us really for you, when you go into that observation, you really need to know, am I going to focus only on whole group correction or small group? And if it's small group, which groups? Let's see. And maybe you need to talk to the teacher beforehand to see, okay, if you know for at the beginning that you're going to focus on small groups, maybe you talk to the teacher and say, okay, which groups do you have? Okay, maybe I'm going to focus on these two groups.
Okay.
Right? So all of this kind of needs to be considered in the planning before you go in to observe. Because what I don't want to happen is that you go in really just not knowing what to observe, and you think you're going to be observing whole class, and it turns out that they just have small group, and then you don't know, you're kind of scrambling to figure out what you want to do. So we need to try to plan as much as we can, because even if as much as you plan, there still might be something unexpected happen. So we're just trying to narrow down the possibilities, right? And then if we have to adjust, we'll adjust. But we don't want, we just want to try to plan as much as we can. So I think based on your research questions, this is one thing that we need to kind of wait and see, but something that you need to think about as far as whether you want to collect data as a whole group or small groups. Because I don't think you want to do both. Okay. So, observation sheets and probably some sort of interviews, right? You want to do some interviews either with the teacher and the students, right? Because one of your research questions is about how they feel. So I'm going to say interviews, but it could also be focus groups. Since you're going to have, I don't know how many students, you may not be able to interview all the students. So as just kind of general something to think about in general, you could probably have time, or you probably will have time to interview up to 3 students, and or do some sort of focus group, that is, meet with all the students or a certain group of students, and basically interview the whole group. So I would be thinking and working on an interview guide. So we'll just call it an interview guide, but then we'll realize that it may apply to an interview, or it could also apply for a focus group. And think of a semi-structured interview, so that you have maybe a set of questions or concepts that you are asking, but you're asking more in a conversational way, that it's not just a list of question number 1, question number 2, question number 3. You want it to be more conversational. So you start off really general, and you base it on something that you observed in class. How do you think the class went today? I was there in your class. Was this a typical class for you? Do you think you achieved your objectives? And they start talking. And based on what they tell you, then you formulate another question, trying to get more specifically into the research questions that you have. So you're focusing on feedback. You want to think about what the teacher tells you and how you're going to adapt the question to eventually get to these the ways in which teachers correct their students. So maybe you saw an example of a teacher correcting a student. You might bring that up and say, okay, I noticed that one of the students had a question about this, or you mentioned this. And adelante. Hola.
Teacher,
Yes.
nada más.
Ya, ok. Ya tienes copias de todo.
Ya,
Sí.
ya lo tuve.
Ok, muy bien.
Sí.
Dale.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Bye.
Bye.
So depending on how they answer the questions, then you come back and direct them towards something that they did in class. But think about the questions when you do an interview as drawing on something that you saw in class, and then asking them, is that typical behavior? Trying to get more generalization as to if that is how they typically teach or react, right? But you want to try to draw on something that you actually witnessed in your observation. So your information from your observation sheets will kind of inform your interviews. Same way with the students. And you say, oh, I see that a lot of you are asking questions about this. Okay, how do you feel about that? And when the teacher says this, or when the teacher said this in class yesterday or today, how did you feel about that? I see. But you want to try to make it as conversational as possible, so they feel comfortable and they feel willing to speak. Because if you're like really drilling them like an interrogation, then they may get a little shy or not feel like they want to respond. For the students, if they're low level, you have to decide if you want to conduct the interview in English or Spanish. If you do it in Spanish, that's fine, but you'll have to translate it all to English for when you present your results. Okay. So let's think about the questionnaire and maybe present something if you can next week, with the idea that we still have maybe a week. That we're in our first week now. Maybe next week you pilot your questionnaire, and then you apply it the third week. Okay. It's really up to you. You know, we've got 3 weeks for the design, and we've got 3 or 4 weeks, I think, for the data collection. So whatever, I'll go at your pace. If you have something beforehand, fine. But let's plan on doing a pilot for the questionnaire. Okay. Do you have any particular questions about the questionnaire or the interview or the observation sheet?
No.
No? All right, so try to come to the next tutoring session with the questionnaire, and if you have something already thought out for the observation sheet and interview guide, just bring that. Whatever you bring, we'll discuss that and go from there.
Okay.
So, any other doubts, questions? No? All right, so let's do that and take a look at the feedback, everything that I upload in Canvas, and also start making changes to your literature review.
Okay.
All right, so we'll see you then next week.
Okay.
All right.
Okay.
Okay. See you. Take care.
Thank you, teacher.